everybody, and welcome back to the Catholic Culture Podcast. Way back in episode something or other, I can't remember what episode it was, actually. I had Matthew Mehan on, a liberal arts teacher, poet, and now writer of children's books, to speak about his first children's book, which he co-wrote with painter John Folley, which was Mr. Mehan's Mildly Amusing Mythical Mammals. And we talked about that book and poetry and the liberal arts and the value of reciting poetry and things like that for children. Now, Mehan and Folley have just put out their second book together from Tan, and that is The Handsome Little Cygnet. So we're here to talk about that book. Welcome back to the show, Matthew.
Thanks for having me.
Whenever our previous discussion was, it was before I added video to this podcast. That's all I can really be sure of.
Yeah, I remember it was just audio.
Yeah. So now we've got this lovely background of pieces from the first book here.
Yes.
So we can see John Folley's work very well situated there. That first book was for kids, but rather challenging for kids, I would say. This book is much simpler. Much more of a straightforward children's book in a way. Was there any reason you decided to go in that direction for the second book?
Yeah, I always wanted the first one to be a kind of display speech of like, here's the literary arts and, kind of like the author's got his chops, like I can do a lot with the literary arts, and I want you to know there's an upper register and a lower register. And I wrote that one as a family book, right? It's sort of the market forces of the world made me pitch it to middle graders, but it was designed to sort of have letter blocks for little kids, some sweet rhymey poems for the younger folk, and then middle grade challenging poetics, and then the back third was a glossary that was basically a kind of ironic and delightful sort of teachings about human nature and the liberal arts and the Judeo-Christian tradition and the Greco-Roman tradition. So this one's just basically like, all right, let's market segment now. And it kind of came out of the idea of thinking about different kinds of books that I wanted to do. And I sort of like the idea of hitting all of the children's book genres and, having books that basically I can accompany a child through their life. So,
Right.
sort of do a little tiny storybook. I'm going to do another one that's going to be a little bit more of a juvenile novel kind of thing, close to it, like very young juvenile novel. I've got a Aesop's Fable book in the works for later. So, just I wanted to, Mr. Mehan's Presents is kind of like, hi, I'm a friend of your family to help you with things. So why not have one for the littles, the middles, and the bigs? And
Interesting. That's cool. That's cool. So the first book kind of spans all of that and something that you can return to as the kids get older and
That's right.
see new things in it. And then you're focusing in on different sort of age groups. Very cool. So maybe we could just start with you giving us the basic concept of the story.
The Handsome Little Cygnet is basically a retelling and an inversion of the Hans Christian Andersen Ugly Duckling story. So rather than the little Cygnet, who's right behind me here, this is the original artwork for one of the watercolors in the book. You can just see him, but you can see him a little more clearly here. The Handsome Little Cygnet doesn't not know where he's from. He actually does know and forgets that he's a swan in a certain sense. And basically it's about a small family of swans raising their little baby swan, a cygnet, in Central Park, Manhattan. And then the little cygnet gets into some trouble, finds some graffiti and wet paint and says, oh, I want to be all those different colors. I don't like being what I am, just this boring gray little bird. But that doesn't go very well for him, and he gets all gummed up and he has to sort of run to his parents and also sort of some other creatures in the park to kind of restore himself, both to himself and to his family, and to sort of growing up in a way that's healthier.
So it's really interesting to me, not least as someone who lives in New York City, that you and John chose to set this story in Central Park. Um, it's a great location for a story because it's a very iconic location, and people all around the world have seen it in films and they know about it. And then it has a special significance for people who have spent a lot of time there. But it also has this resonance because although it's not called Central Park and it's the city is not called New York City in the book, any adult who's reading will know what it is. And the kind of subject matter of the story has this resonance with the sort of city that New York City is. It is very much the kind of city that people who aren't sure about their identity, um, or are maybe choosing just a different identity than they had growing up will go. They will leave their parents. This story is a story about a little baby swan who goes and leaves his parents for a short while, to seek out some bright colors in another place. And that's something that many people come to New York for. They come to escape their parents. They come with a desire to find something different, and that may be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what it is that they're looking for, of course. um but those are all resonances, but I don't know if that's why you and John chose Central Park, so I'd like to ask you about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different reasons, right? I think poetry, right, is not about either or, it's about both and, right? So stacking multiple resonants, like the way you said, is exactly right. Um, I think definitely one of them is that, right, is that New York is a town that is sort of the big city with all of its temptations to reinvent yourself in good ways, right? Sort of like get a new start, but also in very negative ways that are kind of destructive. And so there's this sort of yin yang, sort of a dark side and a light side to the big city, sort of
Mhm.
the coming of age. But also, we wanted New York because New York is iconic, and it needed to pick me up. This is the year of COVID and De Blasio and
Mhm.
shutdowns and masks and misery and riots, and so we even have
Yeah.
like in the one of the sort of darker scenes. There's actually some N95 masks and cloth masks strewn around amongst the garbage, sort of
Mhm.
as a nod to the COVID year. But yeah, especially we wanted Central Park because of this idea of trying to figure out who you are, which I think today kids are given a lot of the wrong kind of message. And they're told that they can be whatever they want to be, and that is going to be who you are, is just choosing whatever you want to be. But in reality, the opposite is true, right? You figure out what you are, and that helps you shape who you are, right? So
Mhm.
the idea of a nature, and then, right, artfully using your own free will and your own prudence and thinking and development of talents and all these things, and your friendships and whatever else, education, to artfully shape yourself, right, to your full identity of who you are and who you're meant to be. uh, that's more like a park, than you think, in this way, right? A park is where you don't just manufacture something out of whole cloth, where you just, like a building where you break it all apart and assemble the pieces, right? And it's all kind of artificial. A park is you take natural things, and then once you sort of accept the nature of a bush, a tree, right, a plant, a fish, then you shape the park artfully, right? So it's that two-step process of a beautiful park, right? Is that it's both natural and artificial in the positive sense of you use some art. There was a teacher, I used to volunteer for young inner city youths in Washington, D.C. On the weekends, teaching them uh, for this really wonderful outfit in D.C. called the Tenley Achievement Program. But the other teacher was this older black gentleman who was a bit of a mentor to me. And he had a big booming voice. He looked like Frederick Douglass, and I could hear him in the next classroom raising his voice to keep these young men awake uh, on a Saturday morning for these tutoring classes. And I was learning from him. But he would say, "Being a male is a matter of biology." but being a man is a work of art, right? It's a question of a lifetime, something like that. This idea of like the taking the nature of things and then accepting what you are as the grounds for then artfully shaping who you will be and who you want to be. That's a park is the perfect place for that. So those are some of the reasons why we really wanted Central Park.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that because, the place that the little Cygnet goes, because he's attracted by the bright colors, is a kind of the underside of a bridge in Central Park. Now, this is a perfectly beautiful bridge, so what I'm about to say is not exactly comparable, but the bridge is covered with graffiti. The underside of the bridge. Yes,
So
exactly.
this
So
is
there he is.
he's headed over there, and then once he
He's heading
gets
over
up
there.
close to the dark corner of the bridge, right, it's much more disturbing and grotesque.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I love that you switched to the it's not in that picture, but you switched to like the comic book style text there.
Everybody's most
Um,
hated font, Comic Sans.
right. Yeah. So it's very interesting because whenever I see sometimes there are nice I don't just think of this about graffiti. I think this about often murals in general, whether they're good or bad murals. A lot of the times the function that murals serve in our cities is to cover up ugly walls, you know, kind of cover up parts of the city that are ugly. Right. That's not the case with this nice little bridge, but it did make me think when you were talking about artificiality, because in the case of the park, they're kind of taking something natural and shaping it in an artificial way. Whereas in the case of like graffiti, it might bring some pop and some zest to a location. I'm not entirely against it, but it often does serve the purpose of kind of like dressing over this ugly artificial structure. So it's kind of an interesting contrast that he's going over to this colorful, it's like the whitewashed. I don't want to denigrate the bridge, but if you kind of just think of it like as the park being grass and water and trees and stuff, and then this stone thing that he's over, you can think of it in terms of like kind of like the whitewashed tomb. Like this is a dead structure, and then it's covered with these bright colors that attract him. But it's not actually his natural habitat. Although for humans, a bridge is a very nice thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just historically speaking, I don't know if you know this about the Gapstove Bridge, which is the bridge at the South Pond where that takes place. That's actually where the biggest rat infestation is, on that corner of that bridge.
Oh,
It's sort of one of the most ratty parts of the whole park. So they're constantly trying to trap the rats, and they dig.
I
So
did not know
so it
that.
has a sort of like it's a beautiful area, but that little corner is a bit of a little dark, nasty corner of the park,
Hmm.
which I just discovered because I have some friends and a sister who live right there, and a cousin who lives 2 blocks away and knows the park very well. So um, yeah, I mean, look, there's murals, there's street murals, there's even graffiti, which is a kind of art form, and then there's tagging, which is kind of a garbage version. This is sort of like a combo of like advanced tagging, but it's all chaos, and it's actually a war of different letters, right? So I wanted
Right.
it to be a kind of image of chaos culture, right? With everyone contesting and competing, and none of the words. There's only one word that makes sense in the entire mural, and it's the word buzz, right, from Hamlet. Buzz, buzz. Like, who cares what the words are, right? It's all just
Hmm.
meaningless. So, and
Yeah.
everything else is actually. We took great pains to have every other set of letters. Now, there's other designs in there that are symbolically fun, but the letters are all chaos. They don't spell anything,
Right.
and it's sort of that idea of just like chaos is not ordered in some beautiful whole way anymore. It's not
Right.
directed to anything. It's just self-assertion, and that's the
Right.
kind of
And
image we wanted on the bridge.
in a story about confusion over identity, being attracted to bright colors because you think your natural identity is somehow boring or insufficient, not knowing what you're going to grow into in the end if you follow your natural course. Um, those tangles of letters have this resonance with our situation now, and I'm sure you were aware of that the LGBT the proliferation of more and more letters which don't actually spell a word.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
so that was the first thing I thought of when I saw those jumbled letters. But of course, they have that more broad, chaotic meaning as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's that kind of the use of jargon to ensnare you with all sorts of unreal accounts of the nature of things by first and foremost denying there's any kind of nature. Jeremy Tate, I don't know if you know Jeremy. He's the president and founder of the Classical Learning Test. He's a friend of mine, great guy. He gave an endorsement to the book, and I can't quote the whole thing from memory, but part of what he said is something I'm paraphrasing, a beautiful story about X, Y, and Z and obedience, he said. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's true. I hadn't
Mm,
like thought of that as central. But the father and mother, who are right behind me with the little Cygnet, they really are sort of saying like, hey, you should stay close to us and take our counsels. Like we really have your best interest in mind. And he says this one line in the poem, right? Well, be careful because a swan's heart can wander where a swan can never go. And the little
right,
Cygnet doesn't quite understand that, and he eventually understands it by the end. Oh, I see.
right.
You don't mean like me physically. You mean me spiritually and mentally desiring things that I can't have, right? And so
Yeah.
the danger of a bunch of chaotic jargon about identity is to set up images that are not pursuable, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
can pursue them, but you will never achieve them. They're atelic images of the good, right? So no end, no telos. They're absolutely
Mhm.
against any any natural completion, right? So the person's designed to be sorrowful, sad, lonely, and frustrated. So the sort of obedience to, yes, the parent, the father, and the mother, but in the end, it's actually obedience to reason and obedience to your nature, right? Like I am what I am, right? As Popeye used to say in the old cartoons, I am what I am. Like that's actually a really important thing to accept. You have to accept yourself, right? So self-acceptance is one way of looking at it, sort of therapeutic lens, but the other one is to simply obey the rules of what you are, what you've been given, right? And that's a I think that's I'll put it this way, the lesson today is anything but that in 99.9% of all children's pop
Yeah.
cultural lessons.
Right. So, to what extent in conceptualizing this book were you thinking about, kind of the specific things of sexual identity but also the broader aspects of identity and nature to kind of, well, obviously you're thinking about the broader aspects, but to what extent were you specifically writing this book to kind of like help parents inoculate their children over the specific forms of identity confusion that are now proliferating
I mean,
later on?
in one sense, uh, it was an obvious part of this kind of story. If you want to retell a coming of age tale for our time, right? It's fundamental, right? There are so many pitfalls to trying to come of age that surround this issue of identity and all of these sort of various, I would call them sexual myths, right? They're basically mythical thinking, and that's almost denigrating the term myth, right? They're not. Some myths have truth in them. Some of these myths are wholly false, like they're just absolutely wrong. And children are being fed this sort of inundation of such images. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was not the sole purpose of the book, but it was certainly a major thread.
Mhm.
And I've looked at that. I have many children. They're on all different ages, and this issue comes up all the time with their friends, with
Mhm.
neighbors, in their schools, in the pop culture, in even just billboards, right? These sorts of questions are front of mind very
Right.
often.
Right. Yep, I've had some billboard inspired conversations with with nephews myself out in driving through San Francisco, just seeing like marijuana. I forget what it was, some kind of marijuana related
Yeah,
billboard or something
and that's
in the middle of
inevitable.
Pride
It's
Month. It was like a
inevitable.
combination of marijuana and Pride Month. uh,
Yeah, it's inevitable, but it's come to a fever pitch where and this is why I've decided I've got to write this book. It's come to a fever pitch that it's very hard to find a healthy diet of art and beauty for your children that don't intermingle some of these chaotic cultural myths
Hmm.
that actually stymie children's development.
Right.
It's getting to be they're sort of a critical mass.
Right. If not in those specific sexual ways, then just in a more general kind of sense.
Yeah, yeah, and
Um,
sort of um, fighting the sort of the virtues needed to really succeed as an adult.
right. Right. So, it's interesting, knowing the idea of the book in advance, kind of having heard of it. I thought that this crisis depicted was going to be much more grave and more difficult to resolve than it actually was in the story. But as befits a children's book, it's very simple and it's very gentle. He goes over, he rubs himself against this wet paint. His feathers get all muddy, dark green, and then he just comes back crying to his mother, and the problem is solved very quickly. But she dunks him under the water, and there's all these fish,
Hmm.
and they're sucker fish. They kind of suck the paint off of his feathers and clean him.
One
um
of my favorite paintings in the entire work, when
yeah,
he's sort of in three stages being cleaned off all of his mud and all the paint,
right,
right? And sort of his wings are expanding and he's sort of rediscovering his true freedom.
right. Yeah, and there's like baptismal imagery going on here. I
Surely,
don't know how much that even needs to be elaborated. It's pretty
right.
pretty straightforward. There is a cool image at the end on the second to last page, um, where it's now winter because the book proceeds through the different seasons. Um,
I wonder. Excuse me. I'm going to get up for 1 second and get it for you, but I
sure.
wonder if it's this one. Is this the
It's the
second to
one where
last?
the water's kind of purple. Yes, it's that one.
Yeah,
So you mentioned rats. There's an owl with a dead rat there, first of all.
that's right.
But the colors are this is kind of like in this image, the colors in the book are pretty naturalistic up to that point, I would say. Like the colors of the landscape. In this image, there's something very kind of like numinous about it. And the water's purple. You can see the trail of fish following them, but it looks like a trail of fire. you know it looks like tongues of fire following them on the pond, which is really cool, and that continues that kind of like almost sacramental imagery, I would say.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Well, Thomas. You're a sharp-eyed reader. Yeah. So the images in that painting are why not? We can do this since you're now a video podcaster. The
Right, exactly.
images here of right, there's two light sources. There's the glowing of the fish, the ichthys, right, sort of the image of the Christian community or the church. And then there's a background glow coming from over the horizon over there. And that is the Plaza Hotel on the south side of Central Park. You know it well, I'm sure. That's where the Christmas tree display is. So the light of Christ
Hmm.
here, and then the light of Christ Church, right, on earth, right, and then sort of over the horizon. So there's almost sort of like a bit of an apocalyptic sort of like end of time, right, at the end of your life, right, where the journey, right, that you're on an actual, journey as a family, as a church, right, as an individual, um, but sort of uh, it's ethereal in that we have this golden light from these two sort of Christian sources, but you also have this indigo color in the water, and the indigo is actually in the bridge scene that I showed you earlier, the chaos culture. It's actually missing one of the seven colors of Roy G. Biv. Uh,
Right.
and this is the reintroduction of the natural
Oh, wow.
color, right? So the
Wow.
water in the fish scenes is this deeper. Now it doesn't translate as well in the book because the inks make you shift it a little, but nevertheless the principle's the same. There's a missing deep blue color in the bridge,
Hmm.
right? And then so it's not just grace, it's also nature, right? The sort of renaturalizing
Wow,
of
that's so cool.
the Cygnet, right? And sort of the water of baptism both restores you to nature and but not just nature unto supernature, right? So it
Hmm.
does more than that. And then the image of the snowy owl, just as a matter of fact, this last winter was the first time a snowy owl wintered in Central Park hunting rats
Hmm.
most of the winter,
Wow.
and squirrels and things and whatever else it could get its hands on. but he survived all winter, and no one had any memory of a snowy owl lasting in Central Park or wintering
Mm.
there in forever. So I thought it was cool because the snowy owl is a beautiful symbol of, in a certain sense, wisdom, but not just an owl, right? It's a snowy owl, so it's wisdom and purity, right? So the sort of pure heart, right? The father says at the beginning of the story, the swan's heart can wander where a swan can never go, right? And it's the wandering of the heart, lust, cupidity, right? Where when the heart wanders to things it shouldn't love, right? And loves go awry. And purity of heart is when your loves remain pure. And so the idea of defeating the rat of sort of sin, the rat of error, right? The rat of false counsel. I don't know if you know that image in the tradition that the mouse is the wise counselor. Think of the
Mm.
lion and the mouse in Aesop's fables, right? That like a king needs these little weak counselors, right? Who are actually
Mm.
quite smart, but they're not powerful. They just have wisdom. But the
Mm.
rat is the opposite of that, right? It's the false
Wow.
counselor. So the false counsels of chaos culture have been defeated by wise purity, uh, and then all the other images together. So I just, I, I try to do this for each painting. Some I think are more successfully excellent than others, but that's the level of depth I like to sew into, children's books. And John is a dear friend and totally on board with the same kind of attitude towards these things. So we just layer in multi folds of meaning. And even if you don't know, like, okay, I'm glossing it and talking, blah, 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 you said there's something numinous, right? You're like, yes, the mind and the soul perceives deep meaning, right? And
Right.
sense. Uh, in even if they don't have articulated all of the various aspects of it. So we want the book to be beautiful, and sort of egg the reader and the child and the adult on to, you know, think more deeply and feel more deeply about the nature of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wanted to ask about your collaboration with John Folley. He's a very, a painter of august lineage, and did a beautiful job with the previous book, but the style has changed noticeably for this one. Um, I don't know how to technically describe the difference. I mean, I'm looking at the pictures behind you now, and there's a greater smoothness of image. There's less
It's a
kind
it
of
well,
outlining.
it's a definitely a different. Chose a different medium. So these are fairly heavy oil, right? These are
Okay.
oil paintings, acrylic, and these are actually pen and ink and watercolor. So
Oh,
we
okay.
figured they're waterfowl and it's for little children. So a certain kind of uh, winsome, lighter feel uh, would capture the sort of brightness of shining water and the sort of beautiful, because the seasons
Yeah.
change throughout the story. So we wanted to get all the sort of colors of the seasons, and we had that idea for Roy G. Biv too. So we really wanted to be able to sort of have bright popping colors, and
Right.
so that all that together, watercolor seemed like the better choice for this one.
Right, because the pieces behind you are like full on, fully realized paintings. And then there's parts in this book where I'm particularly thinking of the scene where you see in different segments of the page them going through different parts of Central Park as he's growing up and learning, are more sketchy.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a variety of there's a varying level of realization in different pages of this book.
No, that's right. That's right. We sort of descend into cartoon a little in that page and a couple other
Right,
places, and then sort of elevate back up into something more transcendent. But it's for
right.
children, so we thought we'd sort of the bandwidth is different. Whereas this one, it fades more into impressionistic things occasionally, but the overall sense is of like high cultural seriousness because that's more the tenor of Mr. Meehan's mildly amusing mythical
Mhm.
mammals.
Right. I wanted to ask about our friend Paul mentioned this to me long before this book actually came out. The symbol on the opening page of the book that is also in the previous book, and he indicated to me that it was a sort of a secret code that you were hoping other people might pick up on and use in their work. So can you show us that and tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So yes, secret code no longer. It is this. We repainted each time in a different way, but it's the same design. This is actually called the caduceus. It's very old. It goes all the way back to Greek antiquity, but this one is redesigned, and it's a Christian humanist caduceus. Thomas More and Erasmus and a lot of the other Christian humanists of the North used an image, not this one, but similar to it in many ways, on all of their books. So, like More's Utopia or The Education of the Christian Prince or any of the old Christian humanist books would have some version of this caduceus on it, and it's a glyph that represents Matthew 10:16. Behold, I
Hmm.
send you out as sheep among wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents, innocent as the dove. Right, and that notion of um, using all of the tricks and teachings of the world, i.e., the serpents, right, with their forked tongues, they're sort of dangerous, philosophy and poetry in particular, but right, the arts of the world, and artfully arranging them in a way that protects and fosters the Holy Spirit of faith, right? Which you can see the egg being artfully balanced between the three snakes, um, and all supported by the hands of friendship. Those are two left hands, presumably the right hands are shaking in friendship. And then this particular image, there's a lot of other aspects to it, but one that's kind of relevant to our discussion is that it's all rests upon the ground of a leaf of nature, right? The green field of nature, right? That's the nature of things. And supported by a border of woodwork, i.e., art helping support nature and keeping it in its proper bounds. So
Hmm.
there's more to say about it, but that's probably enough for now. I'll leave some of the secret code for further discussion. But that's the kind of image, and I put it in both of our books because John and I really do want to kind of call to arms for this kind of serious engagement culturally and literarily. Um, that's not just two simple morality books or just a saint's book here and there, but we actually want to really help inform the moral imagination of the entire culture, and use all of these beautiful poetic and artistic arts to re-Christianize the world. And that's a tall order, and these are just two little kids' books in a certain sense. But Rome wasn't built in a day, but somebody built it. So let's just get after it. So yeah, and others. There's a couple other people who are considering, our friend among them, considering using this glyph or one like it as a kind of constellation of authors who are serious about it. And I have permission from Tan to sort of dole this image out as I see fit to other authors. And
Nice.
people are free to do whatever they want in a certain sense, but hopefully they participate in this sort of friendship of art.
Anything I haven't brought up that you think we should talk about?
I
Any
think the
other
role
interesting
of
points?
parents is one we haven't really talked about. Um, Sort of the image of strong dads, and sort of strong mothers, but particularly like the image of the father is so uh, violated in art today that that's kind of a key issue and something I really wanted in the book. And that father does have a very central role in a way that he doesn't normally.
Well, it's interesting that when the father gives him the Cygnet this advice you mentioned, stay close to your mother, stay close to me, and as you said, the Cygnet doesn't really understand. Oh, why would I leave you? You know, um, and the father has this foresight, and then what happens, and he comes back, and the father just says the exact same thing. There's no rebuke even, because this is a very small child, we're talking about. um he just says the same thing, more or less. Stay close to your mother, stay close to me. And so it's interesting because there's really no, I mean, there's no misunderstanding in deeper sense between the parents and the children in this book. It's I mean, he doesn't understand the counsel his father is giving him, but there's no conflict between them. Um there's no kind of uh the father, doesn't understand his child, and they both need to kind of move and meet each other in the middle. it's
Right.
it's more this natural relationship, and these are creatures of nature. These are animals. These are innocent creatures in a sense that they kind of work exactly the way God made them to, without having to make an effort. And so, in a sense, that makes sense that this parental child relation is, even though something bad happens in the middle, it's kind of seamless. It's just kind of the natural order is there, and there's not that much kind of like hammering at it. You have to obey me. Don't do that again.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, but it's
No,
just interesting the
it's
way it's portrayed, the gentleness and the kind of ease with which it's portrayed.
yeah, I mean, I think in one sense it's a impossible ideal of fatherhood, right? Where you're that peaceful and that meek and controlled when your children screw up, like you have to be very patient. And that's like that's the biblical, right, advice is don't provoke your children, right? Like because the
Right.
temptation is to just dog them so hard because you want them to get up to standard. And so I
Right.
sort of try to set a very high ideal of like I say the same thing. I remain very patient. I don't lose my temper. I'm very calm with you, right? And I have great confidence that God will supply the growth, etc. Um, but I do think there's also a kind of judgment of the father in the latter half, right? Because the first time when he says, "Stay close to your mother, stay close to me," it says that the handsome little Cygnet uh, quickly or hastily replied, I will. I love you so. Why would I wander? Where would I go?" And the second time he says it, "My handsome little Cygnet, so dear to me, stay close to your mother, stay close to me." It says the handsome little Cygnet carefully replied, I will, right? But then he says, my heart will not wander when I finally must go, right? Sort of like I understand now what you meant the first time. And that's when the father then says, "Oh, my handsome Cygnet." He drops the little, right? And so the father is like recognizing to the child, like, you're growing up. That's maturity,
Hmm.
right? And so the sort of very oblique and delicate praise of the father and the sort of judgment that you're growing up. I thought that was also something I wanted to portray of careful parenting, I tell my sons and daughters this all the time. I want you to be careful people, full of care. I don't mean
Hmm.
cowardly or neurotic, but careful, where what you do is considered and thoughtful and charitable and kind, right? And that's hard. That takes a lot of work. And I fail at this all the time, and I fail at being a careful parent in different ways. But unlike most of the rest of depictions of parenting in children's pop cultural presentations today, I wanted to just set the bar super high for like unbelievably excellent parenting that was calm and firm and careful and thoughtful and discreet, that would shame me, right? Because so often what we do is we show like Homer Simpson or some, you know, Family Guy from Quahog, like some grotesque dad who's got some admirable qualities but isn't that great, and then we go, "Oh, I'm doing okay," right? As opposed to like, "Ooh, this worked out perfectly. This is just a smooth humming machine," I wanted that. And I think it's actually important because we're imitative creatures. And if we never see really beautiful examples, we won't strive for anything more. Um, that's part of why we try to make these such beautiful books.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Um, well, this was great. I'm looking forward to returning to the book after having this conversation and seeing all these other layers, and it's just only making me appreciate it more. I really enjoyed also just looking, even after the first time I read it. I was just kind of looking at the images and contemplating them. Aside from reading the text, just as you say, there's a lot that's just in the images themselves to take away, and as it should be with a book for children this age.
Yeah. And we have a seek and find in the back too, which kind of gets at some of these themes in interesting ways, but also is just kind of a fun, almost sort of, hey, if you've never been to Central Park, here's a bunch of monuments that are quite interesting. There's one to the visual arts and sculpture. There's
Hmm.
the Guggenheim. There's the Harlem Mere Boathouse. There's,
Hmm.
the different boat bridge, and just kind of get to know a city. Because I do like the one of the last lines in the Seek and Find introduction is, right. This is and always will be the people's park, right? Central Park is
Hmm.
like an American property. It's a
Right.
republic. The word republic comes from res publica, the things of the people. And I think there's something to be said for Central Park is one of the things of the American people, like Yosemite, like the National Mall, right? The Monterey Bay, like these the Great Lakes, things that are all of ours and we can love them. I think Central Park
Mhm.
is one of those.
Yeah, that's great. It makes the book more special that it has this really specific setting, you know? It's like Robert McCloskey with his book set in Maine, you
Hmm.
know? I love that it has that specificity to it, and it that it's this uniquely American feature. Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for writing this book. Please pass along my compliments to your partner.
Yes, I'm sorry he couldn't make it today. It would have been nice, but
Well, next time I'll yeah, I didn't think of it until the last minute even, just going kind of on autopilot. Well, I had Matt on, so I'll have him I'll have him on again. I didn't occur to me, "Oh, maybe we could add the artist this time," until too late. But, next time we'll get him on the
yeah,
conversation as well.
or have John just tell you about his own artwork independent of me. He's got a lot going on. He's impressive.
Sure, that'd be great. Well, thank you, Matt. This was fun.
Thank you very much.